Join me as I read Hal Puthoff's 2022 paper, Ultraterrestrial Models, the first of 3 bonus episode readings of academic papers that highlight the possibility of an ancient breakaway civilization hiding somewhere in our midst. Hello everyone, and welcome to UAP as NHI. I'm your host Bill Seago, and today I'm offering an audio rendition of Hal Puthoff's September 2022 paper that appeared in the Journal of Cosmology, titled Ultraterrestrial Models. While doing research for my upcoming episode on the topic, I was surprised to find no audio version offered for this or other recent papers on the topic. So I decided to fill that void while simultaneously providing an academic perspective on this particular origin possibility. They are also a good supplement to the upcoming episode, since I'm sure to miss many key points. This will be the first of 3 readings of key papers surrounding the topic that I'll be offering over the next few weeks as a lead-up to episode 13, the Ultraterrestrial/Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis. The episode will be the first in a 5-part miniseries discussing potential origin possibilities for NHI as it relates to the UAP phenomenon. The 3 papers will be read in chronological order as they were released to the public. The second reading will be The Ultraterrestrial Hypothesis by Tim Lomas, that appeared in 2023, and the third, The Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis by Tim Lomas, Brendan Chase, and Michael P. Masters from 2024. I felt it was important to set the stage for my breakdown of this origin possibility, since an exhaustive discussion on this particular topic is somewhat lacking in the UFO community. It's also often overlooked. As outlined in the paper, Puthoff's approach encompasses a broad spectrum of possibilities, considering both terrestrial and non-terrestrial origins for UAP. He emphasizes the need for open-minded scientific investigation into these phenomena, acknowledging that current understanding may be limited. Puthoff's framework aligns with both John Keel's and Mac Tunney's views by including interdimensional entities, similar to Keel's ultraterrestrials, and cryptoterrestrial beings, akin to Tunney's hypothesis, as potential explanation for UAP. However, Puthoff extends the discussion by incorporating additional possibilities such as time travelers and ancient human civilizations. His inclusive approach advocates for a comprehensive exploration of all plausible hypotheses without committing to a singular explanation. About the author. Dr. Harold Hal Puthoff is President and CEO of Earth Tech International, ETI, and Director of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin, IASA. Earning his PhD from Stanford University in 1967, Puthoff's professional background spans decades of research at General Electric, Sperry, the National Security Agency, Stanford University, SRI International, and since 1985 as President of ETI and Director IASA. He has published numerous papers on quantum physics, lasers, and space propulsion, and has patents issued in the laser, energy, and communication fields. Puthoff regularly serves various foundations, corporations, and government entities, to include the Department of Defense and intelligence community, as advisor on leading-edge technologies and future technology trends. Recently, Dr. Puthoff served as a senior science advisor and contractor to the DoD's OSAP ATIP program set up to investigate UAP, which led to the May 17, 2022 congressional hearing and follow-up legislation on the UAP phenomena. Puthoff is still very active in the UAP discussion and frequently appears in television interviews and on various UAP podcasts. He is a central figure in the world of both UAP research and psychic or parapsychology studies. His background is a fascinating blend of mainstream physics, government research, and fringe science, which gives him a unique position in both communities. He was also a founding member of To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge. In the 1970s and 80s, Puthoff co-led the CIA-funded remote viewing research at the Standard Research Institute with physicist Russell Targ. This work became the basis for what would later be called Project Stargate, a U.S. government program exploring ESP, telepathy, and clairvoyance for military and intelligence use. Puthoff worked with well-known remote viewers like Ingo Swann and Pat Price. The PDF of this paper, which includes citations toward the end of the document, can be found at researchgate.net. Puthoff is a very proficient writer and some might argue a hard read. For that reason, I will reduce my pace as much as possible to help the listener better comprehend what he wrote. So, without further ado, I present Ultraterrestrial Models. Journal of Cosmology, Volume 29, Number 1, Ultraterrestrial Models by H.E. Puthoff, Ph.D., Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin, Westlake Hills, Texas. Abstract. Under consideration in this paper are two seminal statements and their concomitants, currently unknown, as follows. 1. There is an unidentified phenomenon interacting with the current human population on Earth. 2. It is currently unknown whether the phenomenon is exclusively extraterrestrial, extradimensional, cryptoterrestrial, demonic and/or jinn, proto and/or ancient human, time travelers, etc., or some combination or mutation of any or all of these. However, it appears highly unlikely that the phenomenon per se is not constituted exclusively of members of the current human population. In this paper, we address the above under the overarching theme ultraterrestrials in order to develop a template to be matched against data at hand and that may be procured in the future. Keywords: extraterrestrials, ultraterrestrials, time travelers, forensics, disclosure. Part 1. Background. As one takes a decades-long view of the UAP/UFO topic, it is easy to become frustrated by what one sees as a lack of robust progress in establishing sure and certain ironclad data points about even the most fundamental of issues. These issues prompt such key questions as follows. Is the phenomenon predominantly nuts and bolts, psychological, or metaphysical, assuming such distinctions can be made? Is the source of the phenomenon predominantly terrestrial, ultraterrestrial, for example, ancient occult group, isolated pre-diluvial high-tech society, stranded ETs and/or gods, or extraterrestrial, assuming that distinctions between these alternatives are meaningful? Has the phenomenon ramped up in our era, or has it been essentially constant over millennia? Are oft-times related topics such as claimed abductions, crop circles, and animal mutilations truly related, or are they separate categories of phenomena? Are institutions such as governments truly that much more knowledgeable than we are, even if only in certain protected domains, or are they essentially in the same position as we are, give or take some hard data in hand? Part 2. Critique. As we critique our position vis-a-vis these issues, three factors stand out as weaknesses that could potentially be addressed by developing new strategies. They are: 1. Data gathering is essentially passive. Typically, events are reported and data are generated and analyzed. This constitutes essentially a reactive as opposed to a proactive mode. This is not meant as a pejorative statement. Astrophysicists find themselves in the same situation. Even seemingly proactive movements, such as John Greenwald Jr.'s FOIA government documents search in the public arena, or attempted collection of the detritus of classified programs by some under special protected conditions, simply constitute efforts to cause the government to release data to passive, ever-hopeful recipients. The ball is still in someone else's court. Other, more proactive measures could be taken, ranging from the relatively prosaic, for example, setting up all-weather, all-sky optical and or IR monitoring stations, through the more tech-intensive approaches, for example, magnetic disturbance and RF gigahertz detectors, multivariable monitoring suites, exoarchaeological investigations, to the arcane, for example, search for evidence of anomalous manipulation of human genetic structure, and stretching to the esoteric, for example, remote viewing, telepathic contact. 2. By and large, our models and or hypotheses are relatively circumscribed. As stated in entry 2 above, although interested parties tend to be proponents of what would appear to be a wide range of hypotheses, ranging from it's all psychological, check your DSMV, through interdimensional and or time travelers and angels, to grays in advanced spacecraft from Zeta Reticuli, there are additional options that, though mentioned in passing in the literature, are not taken very seriously, and therefore go relatively unresearched. These include such categories as a hidden community of ETs and or gods, possibly stranded here millennia ago, a la Zechariah Sitchin's Earth Chronicle series, isolated remnants of a pre-diluvial high-tech society, the Atlantis myth, or an ancient occult group who happened to stumble on new energy sources and control of gravity, and including a post-World War II covert cabal of the military-industrial complex variety, Dolan's breakaway civilization concept. We consider some of these options in more detail below. 3. Analysis and or speculation, not forensics, constitutes the present core modus operandi. As the various hypotheses are generated and pursued, hypothesis generation, and data are gathered, considerable intellectual effort goes into attempting a fit between the two, hypothesis testing. This is certainly a healthy activity, deriving as it does from the instinctive and productive human urge to reduce ambiguity in interpreting one's surroundings. However, this approach could profit by incorporating elements of a more forensic gumshoe style, as in criminalistics and intelligence work. The very fact that so many hypotheses remain on the table regarding the source of the phenomenon clearly indicates that forensic work to date has been inadequate to even eliminate certain options, hypothesis elimination. All three forms of hypothesis handling are required. Part 3. Strategy for forward motion. Given the tenor of the above remarks, the following recommendations are offered as proactive measures to make headway. Specifically, it would behoove us to set aside our tentativeness about any given hypothesis, place it on the table as almost certainly true, and go for it with an aggressive forensic mindset. Consider the following disparate hypothetical examples of the type outlined in entry 2 in the abstract. The extraterrestrial hypothesis. In this scenario, crash retrievals of nuts and bolts alien hardware have occurred, the detritus of which has been distributed in the U.S. to corporate America, the Colonel Corso scenario. Setting aside the specific claims of Colonel Corso, if such is the case, certain telltale signatures should emerge under scrutiny. Moreover, some evidence indicates this could be the case. These would include a certain level of relatively low profile, possibly statesman-influenced, integrated investment and or control of a select set of global multinational corporations with convergent interlocking technology developments, for example, aerospace and electronics corporations. If biological specimens have been retrieved, the development of unusual lines of biological and/or genetic inquiry by highly qualified professionals whose career path would seem to diverge suddenly from what might have been extrapolated from their earlier work. For example, accelerated research into retroviruses. Sudden initiation in the late 40s or early 50s, without clear precedents, and in known UFO-related research institutes, for example, Battelle, of concentrated development of new high-strength, high-temperature, low-density intermetallic alloys funded by nearby government facilities such as WPAFB, for example, nitinol. The accelerated development of geopolitical alliances, space weaponry, etc., for reasons not wholly interpretable in terms of national interest agendas, for example, SDI, U.S. Space Force. Evidence for covert manipulation of the UFO and/or ET theme in the public sector by governmental entities, for example, CIA's 1953 Robertson Panel. Evidence for generally sub rosa, highly classified programs addressing the UAP issue, for example, as in the recently revealed OSAP ATIP programs. Privatized access to space, for example, by enterprises such as SpaceX, Bigelow Aerospace, Blue Origin, or threats to national, international security, for example, nation-state terrorism, might serve to stimulate the surfacing of certain technological developments and/or materials at an accelerated rate, and so on. The isolated humans hypothesis. An isolated, high-tech, closed community of humans with somewhat advanced scientific knowledge exists apart from the known culture. Telltale signatures might include continuing observation of technology only somewhat in advance of public knowledge, for example, 1897 airships, unaccounted for missing financial assets and industrial-grade resources, possibly including individuals, apparent covert misdirection of society in the absence of real evidence to accept the likelihood of ET presence, the relative lack of evidence of extremely advanced sophistication of hardware, for example, hardware clearly beyond present-day design and manufacture, even conceptually. The stranded or colonizing ETs and/or gods hypothesis. Telltale signatures might include evidence in myth for high-tech interpretation of claimed devices beyond human capability of the era to manufacture. For example, nuclear-powered algae production manna machine in biblical times. Hard evidence for isolated mountain bases detectable by satellite signature of fast walker or uncorrelated target flight paths, or anomalous undersea activity or bases detectable by distributed underwater monitoring systems. Covert elite group exercising occult and/or religious influence in society. Evidence for buried high-tech artifacts or locales with unusual signal and/or radiation characteristics here or off-planet, etc. The interdimensional or time travelers hypothesis. Gaining access to our space-time continuum, telltale signs might take the form of Fortean phenomena of instant appearance and/or disappearance of beings. In a reverse process, humans experience portal access to alternate realities. Appearance of beings out of sync in dress, mannerism, or language, or technology similarly undecipherable. Financial transaction timeline or other futures-oriented activity indicative of advanced foreknowledge. Evidence for teleportation of individuals or material over geophysical distances. Appearance of humanoids in conformance with predicted genetic evolution of present-day Homo sapiens, etc. Obviously, in the above examples, we have a helter-skelter montage of elements from much of the mythology of claimed UFO experience. Where I consider we need to go with it is this: to shift away from a strategy that relies solely on further content analysis toward what the intelligence world would call traffic analysis, that is, to first order independent of content. That is, while not eschewing the present strategies in place, we incorporate into our studies, in as aggressive and proactive a way as we can muster, more forensic work to expand our playing field and extract from the data and its surrounds more of the patterns and networks that appear to yoke the data together, rather than just attending to the data itself. Since this takes such hard work and such a commitment of effort in new arenas of investigation, it probably also means, as suggested above, being willing to press a given hypothesis to the limit, even though it may be the wrong one, so that our understanding of the range of possibilities to which we must keep our minds open does not act to disperse our focused activity. Part 4. Ultraterrestrials. As a focused example of broadening the scope of our investigation, let us consider the ultraterrestrial hypothesis as defined above. For example, ancient occult group, isolated pre-diluvial high-tech society, stranded ETs and gods, i.e. sequestered terrestrial cultures, examples 2 and 3 above, existing alongside us in distinct stealth. First, what are the possible signatures of an ultraterrestrial as opposed to extraterrestrial presence? Density of sightings over decades, if not centuries, potentially indicative of a present-time local as opposed to extraterrestrial source. In other words, that the UAP phenomenon is so ubiquitous as to argue against the simple model of an occasionally visiting extraterrestrial explorer. Recent, since World War II, claimed focused messaging regarding elimination of nuclear technologies and concern regarding environmental degradation are would-be reasonable themes for a co-located but isolated terrestrially located society. Via subterfuge and disinformation, stealthily injected proliferating emphasis on the ET theme as misdirection to prevent exposure of local terrestrial habitation, as in Theatre a la Vallee's Messengers of Deception. Interactions with humanoid genotype ranging from modern humans to creatures, including sightings of little people over the centuries, encounters with non-humans that haunt our folklore, let alone genetically engineered biological robots or drones, all variants within the lexicon of alternative forms of the human genome. Seeming emphasis on reproduction, for example, harvesting of sperm and ova from certain genetic lines, let alone hybridization, could bespeak outreach toward genetic diversity for a relatively inbred, local, isolated society on the wane and suffering from a potentially debilitating genetic syndrome. Observation of vehicles not that advanced, for example, comprehensible as opposed to magical, even if nonetheless well in advance of our own. Use of telepathic information transfer, only marginally ahead of present-day technical neurobiological advances in the public domain. Reports of cave-like or undersea destinations during claimed abductions. Given the need for secrecy concerning the reality of all of the above on the part of the ultraterrestrials as co-located denizens of our planet, while nonetheless being subject to a certain level of codependence, the inscrutable nature of the interactions would not be an unexpected outcome. Second, under the assumption of compelling evidence for the above, it would be critical to discern the motivations of the ultraterrestrials to maintain such a secret existence. Of possible utmost concern to them could be an overarching fear of exploitation, even annihilation, due to vulnerabilities, despite possessing certain levels of technological superiority, or fear of assimilation and consequent loss of culture, religion, customs, uncontrolled genetic mingling, i.e. culture shock, fear of human diseases. Concern for consequences to the terrestrial human population with its attendant reciprocal effects on their own culture. Potential disruption of resource gathering, including benefits derived from stealthy interactions with and possibly manipulating certain aspects of the human terrestrial society. Third, what might be the consequences for humanity of disclosure of an ultra-terrestrial group as compared with that of an extraterrestrial visitation? Clearly, the devil is in the details, but one could speculate that the former might in fact be more dire than the latter, considering that they had been here amongst us, perhaps in very personal ways. In contrast, ET visitation, in all probability being more foreign and inscrutable, could be safer. Such topics constitute interesting material for sociological research. For more detailed discussion of what I have called here the ultraterrestrial hypothesis, I recommend The Cryptoterrestrials by Mac Tunney's. Are there any hints in the UAP literature that there is evidence that the ultraterrestrial scenario outlined above may have some validity? Author Nick Redfern, in his book The NASA Conspiracies, asserts that there is. His interview of an ex-NASA Gemini contractor led to the claim that there was evidence of a small band of individuals who were not aliens from some distant star system at all, but supposedly represented the last vestiges of a very ancient terrestrial race of beings that, thousands of years ago, had an advanced and isolated civilization that was responsible for the legends of Atlantis and similar stories, but who were forced by circumstances to retreat into remote sequestered locales for survival, for example, mountains or the seabed. At present, they were primarily concerned about nuclear war and degradation of the environment, and this has led some degree of attempting to influence our culture. However, they felt it had to be carried out under the ruse that they were from distant star systems to protect what they felt to be their vulnerable position, despite their advanced technology. Part 5. Correlation with ET Hypothesis. Although the ultraterrestrial hypothesis scenario considered here considers an expansion of the model to include other than the simple extraterrestrial hypothesis, the predicted observable consequences of the two options are quite parallel. For our purposes here, careful consideration of the data obtained along the way are to be matched against templates for the two major options, ultraterrestrial or extraterrestrial, keeping in mind that it might be both and rather than either or. That concludes the reading of Ultraterrestrial Models by Hal Puthoff. Within a week or two, I'll be reading The Ultraterrestrial Hypothesis, A Case for Scientific Openness to an Interdimensional Explanation for UAP by Tim Lomas, PhD of Harvard University. Dr. Lomas focuses more on the interdimensional aspect of the UTH and helps clarify the differences between the ultraterrestrial, cryptoterrestrial, and interdimensional hypotheses. Following that will be a reading of The Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis by Tim Lomas, Michael Masters, and Brendan Chase. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next time.